We lived in Africa for a bit over 4 years in the Kingdom of Lesotho. How many people, apart from Pete, know Lesotho? Yeah, you don't count. How many people, actually? Because I'm always interested. Oh, a handful. Okay. Lesotho is this amazing little country. It's completely landlocked by South Africa. So it's a country inside of another country. It's a bit strange. There's not many of those in the world. Imagine if Canberra, if our little state or territory, whatever it is, imagine if Canberra was a separate country to Australia. That's what it, yeah, who said it is? But that's what it's like. It's this unique little place. It's a constitutional monarchy. So that means they do have a democratically elected government. So they have a government that runs everything. But they also have a king. It's also part of the Commonwealth. So they have two kings, I guess. But they have their own king. So it's the Kingdom of Lesotho. It's very, very mountainous. Really high altitude. So we lived in the capital city, Maseru. And Maseru is 1,000 meters above sea level. And it's the lowest part of the country. And then the mountains, go 2 or 3. I forget what it was, 2,500 meters high or something, the mountain. 3,007. It's ridiculous. This photo is Mallet Falls in a place called Samenkong. So that's a 190-meter drop, that waterfall that you can see in the background. 190-meter drop. And so that's why it's gotten this nickname of the kingdom in the sky. Because it's literally a kingdom way up in the sky. It's very poor. When we lived there, it had the 3rd highest rate of HIV infection in the world. So really poor nation, a lot of problems there. It was quite a stressful place to live. I'll tell you that story another day, or maybe Debbie will, because I'll just cry and drool all the way through it. But there was huge poverty, a lot of crime. We lived with razor wire around our house. Not everybody, but so many people were HIV positive. And so we would come to church with our kids, and they'd all be playing with other kids, and we're just like, oh, okay, hope nothing. Don't bite each other. Tuberculosis was the big one there too. So we would be sitting in church like this, and then every Sunday morning you would just hear coughing all the way through by half the people. And so we're just there going, oh, please, Lord. It was an interesting place to live. And so what would happen, church, is when I was feeling stressed, I would go to the gym. Yes, I can tell by some of you, you're like, really? Well, you live stress-free, don't you? I would go to the gym and do weights. No cardio, just weights. Pump the bags sometimes, Morgan, just so you know. No, I was very stressed in Lesotho. We will tell you that story another time. And so it meant that I went to the gym quite a lot. And there was only one gym in Maseru. One day, I was there, very, very stressed, very immersed in my workout. Does anyone go to the gym? It's like traveling on a train today. It's like zombie land. Everyone's just got their earphones in, no eye contact. Anyway, I'm getting off. I'm on a train. I'm the guy that's just sitting there, trying to make eye contact, going, "Hey, there's a seat here," and it's never been taken up. Anyway, I digress. I was in the gym, very stressed, completely locked into my workout. So I was being one of those people. I had my earphones in. I was just trying to stay in that zone. Nothing could distract me that day. I was just going through my thing. And I on this thing where it was station to station to station. And so I'd gotten up from one, I got to the next station, and you know how you kind of see someone in your peripheral? And I knew that I was just ahead of this guy. And so I could see he was like waving me on because he realized I was just ahead of him. We were going for the same machine. I sat down, just did a little, nod of acknowledgement. And then I recognized the guy. And it occurred to me, I wish I had done more than just nod. I wish that I had said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you, King Letzi III. Thank you, the reigning monarch of Lesotho. Thank you for letting me cut in on you. Please don't have me killed." Because that's what I did, church. I cut in on the king. I cut in on the king. I looked around and I realized that everyone else in that area had kind of wisely and discreetly just moved to other parts of the gym. Because he went there often. The king was there often, actually. And in this circuit, there was just myself, the king, and the king's bodyguard. The king's security detail. And in Lesotho, there are 3 major sports. There is soccer, there is taekwondo, and there is stick fighting. The king's guards did not look like soccer players. Can we go to the next slide, Morgan? The king, the one in the blanket, does not look like a soccer player either. He's quite a big guy. He's very easy to recognize. It's not that hard. His picture is everywhere. His picture is painted on walls. His picture is covering everything. His picture is on the money that I paid to go to the gym. He's very, very recognizable, the king. And so I'm very thankful, church, that King Letzi is obviously a gracious and a kind king, even towards stupid foreigners who cut in on him at the gym. But here's my question, church, that I hope we keep in our hearts this morning. Who does that to a king? Imagine living in a kingdom and not recognizing the king. Imagine living in a kingdom and ignoring the one who reigns, ignoring the one who sits upon the throne. Imagine living in a kingdom and being oblivious of the king's power and authority, ignorance of his commands and his decrees. Imagine living in a kingdom and not knowing that you're in the presence of the king. Who, church, would ever do such a thing? And we know, don't we, that most people live their lives like that. Most people in our world live their entire lives like this towards God. This is how most people live with the King of all kings, the King of heaven. And the King of heaven draws near to people every day. He's always seeking them out, but they continue to ignore him. They exist from day to day, just like I did in the gym that day. They're too busy, they're too preoccupied, they're too focused on what they're doing. They don't even notice that the king is trying to get their attention. They continue to live in blindness. They continue to be shut off from the truth. They miss out on an encounter with the king. They miss out, like hopefully most of us know, that you can actually become friends, intimate companions with the King of Heaven. We've just been singing it. What a privilege for us to be singing this morning of our majesty, of our God, of our King. And I think worse off than those who have never met him, church, are those who do know of the King. Maybe they've had some relationship with him at some point, but for whatever reason they choose to ignore him. I think in some ways these people are worse off. And I don't even want to say these people because I think we've all been in this place before. They know what's required. They know they're supposed to follow him, but they simply don't do it. Perhaps they don't like the standards of the king. Perhaps they don't agree with the moral laws of his kingdom. Perhaps they feel that it's just too costly to follow that king. Or perhaps they just don't like to follow any king at all. That's often the case. Matthew 10:32-33, New Living Translation. Jesus says this: "Everyone who acknowledges me publicly here on earth, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But everyone who denies me here on earth, I will also deny before my Father in heaven." And Matthew 10:38-39, "If you refuse to take up your cross and follow me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it." Can we go to the next slide, Morgan? Thanks. King Charles. Now, most of us here, church, we don't really relate to kings and kingdoms. It's just not how we live our lives anymore. It's not how most people in the world live their lives. We don't have one family that rules over us, passing the crown from generation to generation. It's just not what we expect, is it? I mean, we do. King Charles is our king, technically. He is our king. But did any of you get up this morning wondering what King Charles was decreeing for your life this morning? None of us, right? This is a classic example. The government governs England. Charles is the king. So he has power, but he doesn't have absolute power to rule. He's the king of Australia, but if he tried to dictate things to us, we'd probably just ignore it, wouldn't we? Or threaten to become a republic, which we've done before. Instead of kingdoms, we're familiar with countries. Instead of a king's court, we're familiar with governments. Instead of a king, we have elected heads of state. We have leaders that we appoint, and they are supposed to do our bidding. We are familiar with opposition parties that keep the pressure on the government, and if the government doesn't perform, then we will vote them out at the next election. It was interesting for us when Debbie and I first went to Lesotho, because we would talk with some of the older people there, because democracy was there, but it was still kind of new-ish. And some of the older people there, they hated it. They just felt like it had completely destabilized their country, because there were these people always speaking badly about the leaders. It was like the old people hated that. It was much better when the leader was in power and authority, and you just hoped that he was a good one. But it was surprising to us how strong that was amongst all the older people in Lesotho. It's kind of like they just wanted to go back and have a king. They really hated that every few years there was this campaign against the leadership. It was destabilizing. Elected heads of state or nations, that's not the case with real kings, is it? Like King Charles. A king is a king because they're born a king. Charles was born a king. We didn't vote on whether Charles would be Elizabeth's son. We had no say in it. A king is a king because they're born a king. In our world today, there are hardly any absolute monarchies. There's different kinds of monarchies. There's those like Charles, where he is a figurehead and he has a lot of power, but he doesn't have ultimate power. Kings had ultimate power. There are some. There's the Sultan of Brunei. There's the King of Saudi Arabia and Oman. And there's the Vatican City. The Pope has ultimate power in Vatican City. Most monarchs today are like King Charles. They're figureheads of their country. They have limited power. And the government are the ones who govern the people. The government are in charge of the armies, of everything else. But an absolute monarch, they are the ones who make all of the decisions. An absolute monarch appoints their own government. An absolute monarch, they will choose a government and the government will do their bidding. So they will have governments, but they are there to do what the king dictates. It's not an elected thing, it's not about the people. It's entirely about what the king wants. Like King Charles, if he wanted to take over America, he can't just say to the British Army, let's go. But an absolute monarch could. An absolute monarch, at his own whim, can say, my army, follow me, we're off to conquer this nation or that, and they don't have to give any reasons for it. With an absolute monarch, you don't know if they will be good or bad until they have reigned. You don't really know that they'll be good or bad until they have reigned, and you really have no choice in the matter. If it's a bad king, there's not usually that much you can do about it. So, church, here's a question. What's the case in the kingdom that we are part of? What kind of monarchy does Jesus have? He is the absolute monarch. He is the absolute king. He is the king of all kings. He is the one who has authority over every other king or wannabe king that has ever lived or will live. He is the king. We will live under his absolute reign. His kingdom will last forever. He will be at the head of that. Every decision in his kingdom will be made by him and for him. And any government that he instills will be appointed by him to do his will. Can we go to slide 4? Thanks, Warren. So last week, church, we looked at the Last Supper and the betrayal of Jesus. We're going to pick it up again where he is being accused of proclaiming himself as a king. John 18, 28, 19 to 22. And I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. But you can read along in yours. Jesus' trial before Caiaphas ended in the early hours of the morning. Then he was taken to the headquarters of the Roman governor. His accusers didn't go inside because it would defile them, and they wouldn't be allowed to celebrate the Passover. So Pilate, the governor, went out to them and he asked, "What is your charge against this man? We wouldn't have handed him over to you if he weren't a criminal," they retorted. "Then take him away and judge him by your own law," Pilate told them. "Only the Romans are permitted to execute someone," the Jewish leaders replied. And this fulfilled Jesus' prediction about the way that he would die. Then Pilate went back into his headquarters and he called for Jesus to be brought to him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked him. Jesus replied, "Is this your own question, or did others tell you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate retorted. "Your own people and their leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world." So Jesus wasn't saying that his kingdom isn't going to be here on earth. He's saying, yes, I am a king. Yes, I have a kingdom, but it's not like your earthly kingdoms. Pilate said, "So you are a king?" And Jesus responded, "You say I am a king." Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true. So my paraphrase of that, church, is this. He's saying, am I a king? Well, actually, I'm much more than that. I'm not trying to become a king. I'm not trying to build a kingdom. I came into this world because I am the king. And if you really desire to know truth, you'll know what I'm saying is true. That's the thing, church, isn't it? Jesus wasn't trying to make himself a king. He wasn't trying to build a following. He was the king. He was the king who has come and has been born, and it's been announced for thousands of years that that's what's going to happen. And his very birth testifies to that truth, that he is the king. He is the son of the king. He is the heir of heaven. He always and still is the King of all kings. What is truth? Pilate asked. Then he went out again to the people and he told them, he is not guilty of any crime. But you have a custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passover. Would you like me to release this King of the Jews? But they shouted back, no, not this man. We want Barabbas. Barabbas was a revolutionary. That's what it says in the New Living Translation. I guess it depends on which point of view. He would probably qualify as a terrorist today. That's how we would talk about Barabbas, a freedom fighter, depending on which side of the fight you're on. So the Romans had a terrorist in their custody, and that's the person that they wanted instead of Jesus. Then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they put a purple robe on him. Hail, King of the Jews, they mocked, as they slapped him across the face. Pilate went outside again and he said to the people, I'm going to bring him out to you now, but understand clearly that I find him not guilty. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said, look, here is the man. In other translations, behold the man. When they saw him, the leading priests and temple guards began shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Take him yourself and crucify him, Pilate said. I find him not guilty. The Jewish leaders replied, by our law he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and he asked him, where are you from? But Jesus gave no answer. Why don't you talk to me, Pilate demanded. Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or to crucify you? Then Jesus said, you would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. The one who handed me over to you has the greatest sin. So I think Jesus was just letting Pilate know who was actually in charge at that time. Then Pilate tried to release him. But the Jewish leaders shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform that is called the stone pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was now about noon on the day of preparation for the Passover. And Pilate said to the people, look, here is your king. Away with him, they yelled. Away with him, crucify him. What? Crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the leading priest shouted back. Then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus away, carrying the cross by himself. He went to the place called Place of the Skull, in Hebrew Golgotha, and there they nailed him to the cross. 2 others were crucified with him, one on either side, with Jesus between them. And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so that many people could read it. Then the leading priests objected, and they said to Pilate, change it from the King of the Jews to he said, I am the King of the Jews. But Pilate replied, no, what I have written, I have written. Can we go to the last slide? Thanks, Morgan. I love this photo. Church, let's think about my time in the gym with King Letzi. Imagine, church, if King Letzi hadn't been a kind and gracious man. Imagine if he'd had no tolerance or grace at all. Because he's not an absolute monarch, but he's the king of Lesotho. He has a lot of power there still. Imagine if I had reacted differently on that day as well. What if I had blown up at the king? What if I'd started telling him about all of my human rights and why I deserve to be there using that machine at the gym? What if I'd had a go at the king? What if I'd mocked him? What if I'd called him a liar? What if I'd said he wasn't the king? What if I spat in his face and struck him across his face? What if I picked up something and started whipping him and made a crown of thorns and mockingly put it on his head? What would the king and the king's bodyguard do to me? There's a time coming, church. We don't know when it is, but it's coming. When Jesus will return to the earth. And this time when he comes again to the earth, there'll be no mistaking who he is. Nobody will not recognize him as the King of heaven. He will literally be leading his army of angels. He will be at the head of his own army, coming back to do business on the earth. Revelation 6:12-17, New Living Translation. I watched as the Lamb, that's King Jesus, broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun became as dark as black cloth, and the moon became as red as blood. Then the stars of the sky fell to the earth like green figs falling from a tree shaken by a strong wind. The sky was rolled up like a scroll, and all of the mountains and islands were moved from their places. Then everyone, the kings of the earth, the rulers, the generals, the wealthy, the powerful, and every slave and free person, all hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they cried to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to survive? Can I ask the band to come back? We're not going to finish there, Paul, just so you know. We're not finishing on that note, but imagine that day, church, because we as Christians tend to think of Jesus coming back as being a great day, and it is. But for those who don't know him, it's a terrible day. Who is able to survive the wrath of the Lamb? Who was able to escape the eternal anger of the king? Who was able to escape his vengeance, his justice? It's good news, church. It's literally the good news. We are. We are able to escape all of those things. We who have not ignored the invitation of the King. We who have sought to know the truth, who have recognized that He is the King of heaven. We escape. We who have surrendered to Him as both our King and our Saviour. And it's a bittersweet truth, isn't it, church? It's a bittersweet church because He's coming back in His full glory. He's coming back completely revealed as God. He's coming back in that way at the head of His army. He's coming back to get us. He's coming back for His betrothed. He's coming back for His bride, which is us, those of us who believe. Those of us who have been cleansed in His blood. Those of us who have surrendered our own will and surrendered to the will of our King. He's coming back for His loyal subjects. He's coming back to put right everything that's been put wrong. He's coming back to shake everything that can be shaken. He's coming back as the absolute monarch that He always was. He's coming back to rule in a perfect kingdom where we have been invited to be His subjects. Not by being good enough to get there, but by accepting His love and His invitation and the price that He paid. But the moment that He comes back, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that He is the King. Everyone. Everyone will be raised to life, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. Every knee. We are in a privileged place, church, because we've chosen to bow our knees. We're in this amazing place of grace. We know that He's a loving King. We know that He's a good, gracious, loving King. But as we finish today, church, I'm going to ask us as we enter again into worshiping the King, that we mostly just do that. That we can be grateful for what God has done for us, that we sit here today with this great privilege of being in His kingdom, saved and welcomed into His kingdom, and we can keep praising Him and thanking Him for that. But as we finish this morning, let's just worship Him because He's the King. He's a King worthy of worship. He's the King. He's always been the King of heaven. And so let's go into that place together. We're just coming into His presence because He's the King. Actually, I want to finish on one other thing. I am a big fan of revival. I believe in revival. And the word revival has a few different connotations. You know, if I ask all of you what does revival mean, we will get 50 different answers. When I talk about revival, because there's historically there have been moments of huge revival all throughout history in different places. The common denominator for me, the easiest way to put it, it's when God steps down from heaven and the King makes His presence known amongst people. That to me is the best definition of revival. when people are desperate and we cry out and we ask God to come and visit us, to be present amongst us, and he accepts that invitation and he visits a place. And I know there's things, there's things that are called revivals, and there's weird things that happen there. People clucking like chickens, barking like dogs, that sort of stuff. Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm with you, sir. No, thank you. That's not revival as I see it in God's word. When God comes to a place, two things happen. For me to qualify any legitimate revival of God, any legitimate visitation of God, two things happen. Everybody becomes aware of their sinfulness. Everybody encounters a holy God. They just know they're in the presence of a holy God. That's the first thing that happens. And then the second thing that happens is they know that he's a good and a gracious God. So the first thing is a conviction of sin, and the second thing that happens is a repentance and connection to God. So that's my prayer for us as a church, as for Yandina, for Australia. It's not just my prayer, everyone's praying that. But I think we can have a little bit of that each Sunday as well. I felt like we had it this morning. We were connecting with God. But what it requires from us is to just get our eyes up on him alone. So that's my invitation this morning, church. Let's just lift our eyes up and our voices and worship our King. Amen? Amen.